Okay, so
Sure.
theoretically.
So theoretically,
Mm-hmm.
if we design something with a certain with all of our measurements laid out exactly how we want them.
Mm-hmm.
So this is fit. Let me preface this by it's a finished condition. Like, so it's finished wall panels that go over a substrate, a gyp substrate.
That
So
theoretically, that
assuming that,
happens. Yeah.
so theoretically the gyp substrate is built and everything is within conformance and tolerance of constructing a gyp wall and constructing it to a level of levelness and flatness, right? That you would assume that when they came back to measure said cladding over the top of that, that they would measure it with all of those parameters in mind and ensure that the request for certain reveal lines, and you're very specific on the size of the reveal lines.
Mm-hmm.
When the installed system is not installed properly to those desired, documented, and shop drawing approved reveal spacings, you wouldn't expect them to come back and say, well, what's the acceptable tolerance? You would say, the quarter inch that I told you it was
It's in
supposed
the
to be.
drawings. Yeah.
Yeah. And so
After it's
my day
installed?
yesterday was
After it's installed? Before it's installed? After measurement? Like, where was that question theoretically asked in the process?
theoretically after installed.
So theoretically, after installed is always the best time to ask that question, right?
Best time to ask that
Because
question,
because they then are in the position of putting it in front of a theoretical client who, at that point,
Yes.
it was fed up and wanting to open their building, especially when we're at the
Yes.
finishes stages, and we'll just bend over at that point and say, "Okay, we'll accept it," because it's. I mean, that's what happens,
So
right? And they know this, and
so
they theoretically
theoretically
know this.
well, so theoretically, let's just say that's not the case. Let's just say they want exactly what they were expecting,
What the design intent
and
was, yeah.
what the design intent was, and say theoretically that they are very dissatisfied with the installation and theoretically want us to make sure that it's done right. And it's I'm pretty sure people are saying theoretically
It's a hypothetical, yeah.
it's a hypothetical, of course. But you know what? But okay. So here is an interesting
This
thing.
never
'cause
happens on
this is-
projects, right? This
This
is
is
the first
literally
time I've heard
something.
about this.
I was going to say let's like when you're doing finished materials, like you're doing a panelized system, and I had this on an older project of mine, not theoretical because it's already constructed and already occupied. That
That one's real.
they came back and they did say, hey, we installed it. We did realize that we are missing this or that or anything. What do you want us to do? Do you want us to go back? Do you want us to take it out and reinstall it? Or do you feel like it's within tolerance? Now, I've heard multiple people ask about being within constructability tolerances for, I look at constructability tolerances as, everything below the skin of the actual, like, we're talking about finished materials like casework or millwork or things like that are intended to basically be measured and built based off of the conditions that they're going to be built in, right? So you theoretically, we'll go back to the theoretical part, you theoretically will actually have
Theoretically,
the substrate
actually.
built.
Yes.
Yes. You'll actually have the substrate built before you come out and measure it. And then if you see a bust in the built conditions versus what is the design intent before you, it's that
This
measure
comes up.
twice,
It's
cut
supposed to come up
once.
at the OAC meeting, right?
Yeah.
And
Well,
if it doesn't, and they just move forward, and then there's because I mean the thing that you're describing is the foundation has to be built right. And then the framing has
Right.
to be built right. And then all of these things
Right.
add up
Right.
because the errors ripple
Yeah.
and cause further errors for whoever's coming in
Right.
later, right? Which it always sucks to come in
Exactly.
later. But at that point,
Yes.
I mean, that's why they say like the last 10%, the last 2%, whatever the percentage. That's the most difficult to get right, right? I've built
Right.
projects myself, and that is the
Well,
hardest part. The finish work is the hardest because you have to deal with all of those compounding errors, unforced as they may be, all the way
yeah.
up to the end there.
Well, think about this. So, like when they will submit their submittals for an entire project within the first 10% of the project timeline, or
Well,
earlier,
because
really,
of lead times and for good reasons.
because of lead
Sure.
times and things like that.
Yeah.
But if there is constructed conditions, as you like, everything is dependent on those constructed conditions, you would think that they would say, all right, well, hey, we won't submit this until later once they can verify all of the in-field conditions. The however is that 9 times out of 10, they don't do that. And so what the architect is typically forced to do is essentially litter the entire thing with little caveats or verify in field or this or that. And that doesn't necessarily always go over well, especially if somebody's like pre-making everything prior to that actual final installation.
A good contractor
Just like,
wouldn't do it that way, right? And I'm just
yeah.
unfortunately like that. This
Are
is
you going
what
back to the theoretical?
this is what gives people no, like this is reality, right? Like there are good
Yeah,
contractors and there are
Right.
not good contractors, and you're talking about
No.
characteristics of contracting that lead to good experiences versus bad experiences, which lead
Right.
to all kinds of things put in as notes, put in drawings because it's CYA at that point, right? Because you've had a
Right.
bad experience
Right.
in the past.
Yeah, it's actually that's funny that you'd say that is because most of, say, additional notes that are added on drawings or in specifications are usually not from just your standard manufacturers. It's like, oh, yeah, make sure you put this in here just to kind of cover. It's like somebody somewhere down the road experienced something bad that they're like, this will never happen again.
Yeah.
And they put in those notes. General notes are usually like, they ain't going to do this to me twice.
Well, that's what a whole I mean, we see this on the entree architect community all the time. What's in your contract?
Right.
Regarding
Exactly.
this situation that you've never been in before. And a lot of times you're making a conglomerate contract, even if it's your first one, from everybody else's bad experiences and all the other litigations that have happened. And contract documents are no different. Like it's still part of the contract. It's just a different form of it, right? It's a graphic drawn form. And then you've got the specifications. And all of it is designed based on the way capitalism and corporations and businesses work. I mean, we've seen
now,
the
I will
entire
say this,
gamut.
that you and I have had this conversation, in fact, just a few episodes ago when we were talking about spec writing, specifically the onus of making sure that, let's just say you're doing some interior millwork and your drawings say one thing and your specs say another. And it happens.
Sure.
It happens all the time. Unfortunately,
Theoretically, hypothetically.
hypothetically, theoretically, or whatever else you want to do to kind of explain that sometimes there is an errors and omissions on something. And, you
Just
just
normal
hope
part of
that,
professional services. Yeah.
well, it's just you hope that that you have something in there that covers you from that extreme condition. So say, for instance, you're looking for a specific tolerance. Well, damn, you better draw it that way. Because if not, if there's nothing else in there for you to hang your hat
You're
on,
leaving it up
on
for
what that-
interpretation.
you're in leave. And then when you come out and you're like, that's not what I wanted. And
Show
the
me what
contractor
you
says, well,
where's what you wanted?
show me what you wanted. Exactly. Exactly. Show me where it is.
Right. Show me. And
And
that's
if you-
legit. That's a totally legit response.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. I happened to be showing somebody a project of mine back when I was on my own. And this was one of those mistakes of youth that I did not coordinate the concealment of some plumbing just in one specific area. I did it almost every other condition except for one little area that was just underneath the sill of a clear story. And there was a piping that came out, did a 90, and then came back and did another 90 right in the corner.
Beautiful.
And I basically asked them, like, it was too late for them to conceal it. And so basically I, in the field, asked them to tighten it up as best as possible, because the way it was originally was even worse than it is now. And there is not a single time I enter that building that I don't just stare right at that.
It's rare that anybody else will ever care about it as much as you will.
They may, exactly.
Right? And I'm not talking about the owner or even the users. I'm talking about the people who made it happen, the builders, right?
Yeah.
And especially when it comes to, like, man, electrical, like, locations of things,
oh my goodness, yeah.
wall warts that are just freaking littered all over a main entry wall, like right when you walk in the doors and you look and you see a thermostat and an alarm, and it's just kind of these random pock marks, and it's like, these are how you learn these lessons of, like, how do you draw things and why do you draw things the certain way, and, and how do you coordinate drawings, and who do you do that with, and how do you go through and make sure that stuff is all lined up the way that you want it.
Right.
Nobody, not your engineers, not your project manager, not your construction administrator, like, they're never going to care about it as much as you are, because and I hate to say that, but, like, even though you are all quote unquote on the same team, like, people have different priorities. And I mean, it's unfortunate that you have to walk into this building and experience your little climbing gym in the corner of pipes.
Yeah. It was something. I was talking to a client, and they said that they get a kick out of, and yes, I am.
You're distracted.
Yes. I had to write it down because of, how he's like, they walk around a building often looking at Tixies. And I kind of like looked at him like, Tixies? Did exactly that.
What?
It's when you have a double-sided exit sign that you can see through the glass and it says Tixie. And they were just like, you don't know how many times. And so that was, and it just so happened to be in a project that's currently under construction that I was just on a site visit for, and we were walking around, and they were looking at the exit signs that we have scattered throughout the building, especially the ones near a glass wall or glass door or something like that. Mm-hmm. And they were just like, you know what? Surprisingly, we haven't found any Tixies. And that's how it all started. He was like, and then he was just like, yeah, we walk around the buildings all the time looking for Tixies. And I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And then are you writing it down?
Yes.
And that was it. And he was just like, it's when you have a double-sided exit sign that you didn't consider.
There's no opaque. Are they seeing the reflection in the glass, or it's the sign itself that doesn't include like an opaque liner in between the two sandwich pieces? Okay.
That's it.
So
it's
reading. It's
not
both ways at the
double-sided.
same
It's just
time.
it's reading exactly.
Well, no, I mean, it is right. It's like it's funny because the exit sign is for the people inside the building, but you can also see it from outside the building through the glass.
Exactly. And see, these are like the little things that, like, we sometimes just don't think about. You're like, oh, well, you have to have an exit sign there. Mm-hmm. You're just like, okay, well, think about that exit sign. Right. Think about what you need to do to that exit sign from the 360-degree view here. Like, it's not just about the person staring at the door saying, that's the exit, that's where I need to go out. But it's like, oops, I forgot the little opaque panel on the back, and now it's a Tixie.
I learned a new term today.
Exactly.
Great.
It was like the best thing I'd ever heard. I was just like, thank you. Because, like, now I don't think that and it's one of these things. It's like, guarantee you that there was somebody somewhere somebody now has a general note in their
No
drawings.
tixies allowed.
Exactly.
Right.
That is totally covering that up.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
It's interesting to
That's
think about this and like the level of detail that drawings have to get to explain all this stuff. Like and just this
yeah.
idea of the craft of what architects do. And is that going
Yeah.
away or is that getting better? Because on some level, it's like there's no end to the amount of
Well,
detail you could put in a set of drawings. And at the same
yeah.
time, you only have a certain amount of time to do this. So, yeah, go for it.
Well, let me give you an example. So if you think about it, yeah, there's like it's tons of it's tons of information that you sort of have to track as well. I made the mistake of opening up my something while you and I are talking, and so now you see like the big old
I can see you're very bright all of a sudden. And I can't
very
see your eyes any longer.
yeah. So all right, I am going to there we go. I had to
Back to
close
normal.
it real quick. So back to normal. Think about the struggles that we all go through when you have a project, because information is so readily available to put on a set of drawings. And because, contractors, kind of back to where we started this conversation, are really looking for, if you're wanting the nth degree of something, they want it on a drawing. They want it in the document so that, they aren't being accused of not doing it the way that you wanted when, a lot of times we're doing drawings with design intent, right? And so it's a kind of means and methods thing or something like that. And 9 times out of 10, sure, we don't really need all of the specific information. But then when you do that 10th time, you're really looking, I need that specific information to be translated in the drawings because I need it built this way.
Mm-hmm.
But so the reason why I just went kind of all white for a second there in my, because I quickly pulled up the number of drawings that I had submitted for the last project one of the current projects that I'm working on. And to think that with the amount of drawings we submitted, that you would be able to catch everything in there to make sure everything is coordinated, even in the world of BIM.
More drawings is harder to coordinate. I will just put out like there's an inverse proportion rule at work here.
Yeah. So let me just for you, like, throw out a guess of how many drawings I had in my set.
I'm trying to go back in time because I know you've mentioned like kind of a running tally as you've gone through this project.
Yeah.
And I think the last time I heard it was like 1,200 or something like that sheets. Was that right? I don't know. At one time, maybe.
The total submission, because
not architectural. You're talking all in,
just
consultants and everything.
Now remember, architects have to review those too, all of the drawings, to make sure that what they're doing is jiving with what you're doing, and vice versa. Like, if we're saying we want a linear diffuser in this location, yet
your engineer's showing a round one.
They're showing a round one,
Yeah.
or round hole in a square, a round hole in a square peg.
That's never happened.
Whatever. That's the saving. Anyway, 2,156 drawings.
2,150. Wow.
2,000.
That's not That's not something to
drawings.
brag about, right there.
It is not something fair. Now, understand this is the project that has multiple buildings and all of that other stuff.
It's
But
like- yeah.
still,
Yeah, but still,
that's
a big project. Yeah,
2,156
and
drawings.
coordination nightmare. Coordination nightmare. Even
Coordination
with
nightmare.
BIM, even with digital collaboration, cloud, this, that,
And-
the other thing, everything.
Yes.
It's no joke.
Somebody will say, Cormac, is everything in this drawing set coordinated? And if I ever say yes, reach across the table and slap
You've
me,
got to have
because-
some really good response to that question.
There is no
Some
way
you have to. Oh,
humanly
excuse me.
possible.
Let me get back to you. I need to talk to legal real quick. Like, what's my acceptable answer that I
Exactly.
can say on the stand here without saying yes?
Exactly. How do I say it is coordinated as best as possible, but in a legal way
It's
that
within
doesn't
the
put you on
it's
the
within the
hook?
standard of care.
It's within the it's within the construction tolerance.
It's within the construction tolerance that the contractor's building it right now. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, I'm curious if we go back to the beginning now, like what do you do with this hypothetical situation where the tolerance after it's been built, the question is this okay when it is clearly not for
Right.
the client?
Well,
The client says it's not. What do you do?
so hypothetically, you start working through solutions and coming up with basically measure everything that you have to try to determine if there's a way to salvage everything that is built, that's already constructed and already out on site, and modify
Adjust, yeah.
the overall
Sure. I mean,
the
that's a
overall.
nice teamwork thing to do, but I mean that creates
Yes,
a lot more work for the architect who is not going to get
it
paid to do that work.
it does. However, at the end of the day, I mean,
Client's got to be happy, right?
client's got to be happy. It's got to be something that, in this hypothetical situation, it really is showing I think, an actually really good example of collaboration between the architect and the contractor. Nobody ever really wants to budge. They're like, no, 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 you got to do it the way I said. No, no, it's built this way, and that's all you get. And then you're back and forth, back and forth. This one is like, let's try to work out the best possible solution. Oh wait, sorry, hypothetically, it
But
is,
there's
you know,
definitely times where the answer is like, no, rip it out and do it again. And there are many
right.
contractors who will just say, yep, you're right. I mean,
Well,
there are,
so
I mean, nobody wants that to happen, but there are contractors who have the integrity to say, we will do it again.
So I will give you another perfect example that, so I did talk about the constructed project that had all of the wall paneling, wood wall paneling throughout the entire lobby space and everything else. And we had some mock-ups done. And those mock-ups had a combination of, acoustic, micro perforated acoustic ceiling panels. Unfortunately, because of the system that we were using, they couldn't do a natural wood laminate. They had to do a typical plastic laminate. So what we ended up doing is we went round and round with a design, not really a design build, a design assist contractor to help us with how to match all of the woods from plastic laminate to natural wood, because there was the desire is that all of the wood paneling be natural wood. Just knew that the ceiling that was, you would never really actually see them up close next to each other, but they wanted the appearance that they were, continuous. And so we had a mock-up done. Ceilings were already in place. Ceilings came from Switzerland. You can't, it's going to be really hard to like pull them down and send them back. So we had the mock-up of the wood, that was side by side with the already installed ceilings. Couple rounds, we got it, hit, matched perfectly. They ordered all the wood that came from the same species and same kind of like lot run as the mock-ups. So we were all good.
But
I don't know if I
except,
ever told you this, except so then they were like, the panels are being installed. This was on one of the off weeks because it was out of town. And so we were traveling to go there. And I'll keep it clean, but we went out there, and a friend of mine in the office, she was with me, and she was rounding the corner before me. This is a big building too. This is 100 and some odd thousand square foot building. And throughout the entire building, the multiple floors of this building echoed the words, "What the beep as loud as you possibly can.
Wow.
From not a very,
Just a little surprising then, I guess.
yes, just a little surprising how off it was. And it didn't come from me either. It came from her.
Yeah.
She was the one who
She was the
and
canary,
of course,
the canary going down the mine shaft.
And so, I round the corner and I'm like, oh, you gotta be kidding me. Like, we went round and round with this. And this is not right. Come to find out there was some health issues that kind of led to the supervision of those panels being run becoming wrong. And again, admirable, but the contractor said, we will make it right. We will rip it all out. We'll make new ones and reinstall them. To the tune of him basically taking a bath to $1.7 million worth of wood paneling. We said no. We accepted it as it. We did, but
ouch.
We didn't. The client did.
The client did.
The client accepted it.
So Cormac, I just want you to remember there's been times when you have seriously criticized some architect's work on this show. And crap like this happens, right?
But
you had no control over this.
But remember when we were in it was San Francisco, and I don't know if you were with me. I don't think you were, because you were working.
No, you went to the federal courthouse, right?
So I went to the federal courthouse. And okay, I remember who I was with. I won't say their name because they've got a show, and I'm not going to.
You're not going to promote them, right? Good.
I mean, I like them. I'm just not going to promote it. But I said to them, because I saw something, and this is a Starchitect. This is a very famous Starchitect, and you already said the name of the building, so
people can Google
put
it.
Two together.
People can Google it.
People can Google it and figure out what building it is. There are some very questionable details. There are some very questionable on the way of bad.
Questionable bad.
But I turned to him and I said, I don't know if I'm ever in a position anymore to criticize somebody knowing that was probably a value engineering issue. Mm-hmm. That somebody said, yeah, I get what you're trying to go for. We
not
can't
on
afford
a
it,
federal
or,
Starchitect project, VE.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. So
over budget.
I mean, yes, we're all going to look at and assess and criticize and everything else, somebody's detail. But we will also, if we're fair, probably say to ourselves, yeah, I probably know what happened here. Yeah. Because I can almost guarantee you that the details that I saw in that building were most certainly value engineered out, because there's other things that detail was trying to be on the building that you see the detail and they're like, man, that's close, but it's not. For some reason, somebody decided to do something different. And it most likely is that, well, if you want this canopy, guess what? You're going to have to half-ass it. You're going to have to get close. And I think that's what happened. So, yes, as much as, and so, again, it's one of those things that every time, and now I haven't actually been in that building since, but if I ever go back into that building, it's the one, I'm going to have to like walk through the lobby space like this, like hands over my eyes, like I'm not looking.
Well, okay, I have a legitimate question here, I think. I have a legitimate question, because this stuff happens. Go ahead. You have a before.
Before you ask that legitimate question, because we did a show on this, and they asked me, I took a photograph of that lobby. And sure enough, I went into Photoshop and I made that wood match.
Generative fill.
I
love AI.
Admit it out loud.
I love AI. Yeah.
No, well, this was even pre that.
Yeah, it was. You had to do this manually. You
I actually had to like select all of that slightly darker wood tone. Sat there and then adjusted the hues and colors and everything else to get it.
Look at you. Yeah. Okay, my legitimate question is, where is the construction administration person in this kind of, because this is decision making. This is design
Yeah.
in the moment when it needs to happen, where it probably needs to happen the most, right? Because it's their stuff is showing up on site. People are putting it on the wall or whatever the case may be. They are applying it to the panel system. They're doing these things. Where is the construction? Is there no construction administrator on site? Is this stuff happening overnight when no one's looking? Like, how does this stuff happen without, on these big projects? Like, obviously this doesn't happen on every scale, every size type of project. This happen, but on big projects, there are full-time CA people on, and they can't be everywhere all at the same time.
Yeah.
But you're talking about, you said like some huge number of wall paneling in a huge building, right? And it seems like it should be kind of obvious. So are we going back to like nobody's going to care as much as you do about this, and somebody just didn't like, oh, it didn't even cross my mind that might not be right, kind of a thing, or what's going on here?
So I asked this question yesterday when, and it was when we were talking about the Tixies, and I was in a room with the client and everybody else, and we were just talking, and I saw something installed in our building that was a little questionable on why they did it, and it was furnishings. And they installed it and covered something over, and we were like, why? And it's a question that comes up on almost every project that I've ever worked on in my life, where I've been involved with construction administration, where you have to ask, did they look at this and say, yeah, it's wrong, but whatever, kind of thing.
Just
is like
not caring. Like not really
that
fully,
you just
fully
don't
caring.
care and you don't question. Now, in say the case of this particular one, there's locals, they're local architects and that are working on the project that may not. I've worked on a couple of different projects where the local doesn't really necessarily put the same level of care on the specifics that I would. And again, though, making sure that this goes back to the conversation we were having about the documents, is making sure that the documents, if you start griping about those little specific things like, hey, the wood's got to do this, or hey, this has got to do that, or hey, this detail's got to do that, making sure that your drawings back that up for you, making sure that when you do that, when you make that big stink about, hey, I want you to rip this out because it's wrong, that you've got a leg to stand on. And not everybody, we could even say this about contractors, not everybody is as familiar with the contract documents as you are.
I like how I giggled when it's like, oh, not everybody, meaning hardly anybody.
Yeah, hardly anybody. Especially when you look at some of the tone and tenor of some of these RFIs that you get, and you're like, hey, can you provide more information on this? You mean turn the page and look at the details?
Well, and granted, like nobody is as familiar with these documents as you are because you've been working on them for years and they've been looking at them for 3 hours, right? So, but yeah, not actually going through them before asking a bunch of questions is kind of
I mean, if you're going to bid on it to build it, you should understand.
No, you just let AI look at it and say, how much should I charge? Yeah.
Let AI, let the change order AI run a little bit.
Yeah.
Like, what did they forget and how much more can I charge?
This whole idea, though, of CA and the purpose of CA is to get in front of these problems and know what's coming up in the installation, in the sequencing, and get in front of these issues. And you have mock-ups, and you have submittals. Because I want you to do this. I have a question though about kind of maybe what the potential downfall is here because of like the way that our drawings have been delivered forever, which is like black and white, right?
Yeah, right.
Black and white drawings.
Well, what's actually funny is just had another conversation in another project, not the hypothetical one and not the one that we were talking about that's already constructed, but the 2156 sheet one, that there is caveats in that, like some of the deliverables are models, analysis models, and things like that. And they're like, well, we've been generating a lot of these RFIs off of your model. And they were like, no.
Right.
No. The model is for informational purposes only, and it is not,
The contract
a
documents.
deliverable of,
Right.
it's not even built. When we're drawing it, we're not drawing it to a level 350 or 400. We're typically doing it to a level 300 drawing that does not include all of the, connection details and all of this other stuff. It is not a shop level, shop drawing level model. It is just a design intent model, right? And so they're like, well, you're missing this information or that information, and nowhere in our contract is that deliverable to be that way. And so you and I had a conversation ages ago with shop architects when they were talking about the deliverable for the center and how it was a model-based delivery. I can only imagine, and I don't even think that we actually got into it as part of the conversation with them, what the level of detail that model actually had to be versus the level of detail the models typically are when you do a 2D delivery.
And it's not delivered in the same package that you use.
Right.
It was
Exactly.
It was done in Digital Project, probably, right? Like Frank Gehry's,
Exactly.
Gehry Technologies Digital Project, which is based on CATIA, which is used to design aircraft. And so completely different. But again, you have to know all that up front, right? And you agree to do that in up front, where everybody has had those conversations and they have those expectations, and they are actually in the contract.
Exactly. So, and if you think about it, back to our original, like to the start of this conversation, the expectation, as you said, in the contracts are going to be that everybody's going to be, designing to that nth degree. That like you will be doing, and maybe it's not that necessarily the structural engineer is going to be doing the connection details, because they typically don't. It's typically the steel contractor, but then that's when you have the steel contractor on the project at a certain level where, again, they're starting to develop drawings before the construction documents are even done.
Yeah.
I mean, they're
design build that happens. Like you get those subs involved at the table when you're figuring this stuff out. And
I mean, the hypothetical project that I'm talking about, we had design assist for a multitude of different things because of the complexity of the project, because of certain actual tolerances that we did need to meet, the calculations that we had to do for our facades to not exceed a certain weight because it was, cladding an existing building. And that existing building could bear just so much weight. And so the parts and pieces that we put into the facade had to either meet or be less than the limits of the existing building. And so we had to go through the whole process of essentially doing a design build during the construction document phase.
Yeah, to know if it would work.
To know.
Yeah.
It's just like, okay, here's all of the parts and pieces, run the calculations. Yes, you are going to be under the total weight load that this building can bear. It was actually for me, it was pretty educational to kind of like, never really thought about doing the calculations of like the loading of, certain decisions in facade material.
That is a super cool process, I think. And technology could really enable you if you actually have the experience of, the wisdom of somebody in that trade sitting there with you, or even one of their technicians, or everybody. You've got kind of this BIM room, big room kind of a scenario where you're
Right.
solving these problems together. And it's like, well, what if we change the gauge of the metal? Well, okay, if we do that, we need to add these structural ribs every so often. Okay, so what's the weight trade-off if we go this way versus that way, kind of a thing? And those are amazing educational experiences to go through, and super challenging and super fun. I think that that's like the best part of architecture.
I don't, you brought it up, so I'm going to go off on this tangent for just a second. Even just the choice of materials of like, there was a certain portion of this building that we wanted an insulated metal panel. There's just so few insulated metal panels that could be there because it was a 2-hour rated insulated metal panel. But we also wanted it to have an architectural, from their architectural line. And there are other people who can do that, but there are ramifications if you go to, so like our base of design was X. We used X, we designed everything to X. Well, come to find out that the contractor said that if we change to the Y panel, we can offer the savings. One thing that they didn't factor in is that Y panel doesn't have the same span capacity as the X panel did.
Mm-hmm.
So now the Y panel now has to have the supporting structure that goes into it. And so now when you're looking at it, you're like, no more savings.
You got to put more structure behind it. You're not saving anything.
Exactly. You're adding structure to it. You're adding like cold form framing behind it, to pick up those spans. And then you're just like, okay, well, we've committed to doing the Y panel now, but now, the owner's looking at it, it's like, well, where was that savings?
Yeah,
like,
There's so many times where it's like, in the moment, this sounds great, and this situation happens all the time. In the why wouldn't we do this? Because nobody's taken the time to actually follow that path all the way through the project and see what the true cost is, because this changes this, which changes this, which changes that. Oh, we didn't think about that.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's where, when you were talking about the architect in the construction administration process, that's when they come into play. Like,
because of their experience.
I'll say the one thing that I do actually have a pretty good ability of doing is kind of seeing the ramifications of decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not, it's based off of experience. It's like, I've got enough experience to know that I've looked at, during my initial design assessments, I was looking at both panel X and panel Y. And the reason I chose panel X was because of its span capabilities versus panel Y. Because panel Y, I might actually like panel Y's overall appearance more, but I've just added so much additional cost because of structure that any offset in panel to panel is completely out the window when I've got this. Now I have more introduced structure. And so when they have this conversation, I'm like, but in the end, they're like, well, did you look at this panel? Look how much savings we can get. Like, panel to panel, yes. But how do you make that panel work? And they're like, what do you mean? And then you start asking that question, and then they have to go back and start running the numbers and say, well, that's what you meant.
And one difficult thing, this rarely happens, I don't even know if it happens ever, is, okay, think about your 2156 sheet set that I wrote down the numbers so I could come back to it right now.
Good.
Whose name is attached to all those decisions that make up that 2156 sheet set? That doesn't happen. And that's a problem, because when it comes time to talk about the option of swapping out panel X for Y, the person who figured that out in the very beginning is probably not part of that conversation, because nobody knows who it is. And does that person even work here anymore? Right? I mean, that's a reality. And let's just say they do. Nobody still knows who it is. It would be rare to address and find that person to actually become part of that conversation, so that they can bring it up in the moment and say, you know what, this was already all figured out, and we have to stick with this because of that.
Right. Yeah. Because nobody ever second guesses anything during construction.
But there's no mechanism in place to even do what I just talked about, right? Like you would think maybe with BIM there is a way to do this, but at the same time, what a mess, right? It would be a disaster.
Right.
And things get changed along the way, and somebody else makes a decision that overrides somebody who was there first, and these things happen. Like it's a miracle. Like we talk about this on the podcast before, right? It's a miracle that this building even gets built. With all of that stuff that just is kind of organic. It's like watching the Amazon rainforest grow. It's like how, and oh my God, at the same time, because it is such this weird organic process of how buildings actually go together. The decisions that have to happen, the accumulative decisions that have to happen. Is that the right word? No. Cumulative decisions that have to happen, and overrides and changes of course, and oops, erase that, go back, try it again. There's so many things along the way, and it's just like, whoa. And so when these new issues pop up later on down the road, you can never really incorporate the original decision makers back into that process and save some time and really understand the true, like, here's the question you should be asking instead of in the moment. It's obvious. Of course we should swap these panels out. This one costs half as much. Turns out that's not quite the whole deal right there.
Yeah. Right. And by the way, they went with Y because of the perceived.
So they put in more structure.
Exactly. And the funny thing is that, so with that, like you then have to chase back and figure out whether or not the existing structure that you
could even support
right? could even support the thing.
But you do it, and that this is another crazy thing is like, and we do this.
Exactly.
You would say, who would ever do that? And it's like, it happens all the time. Like this actually happens all the time.
All of the I will say that what was crazy is like all of the different decisions. So these were metal panels that were added to a structural system that we added to the existing building that we were cantilevering off of it, that had to meet a very specific vibration criteria because
I know which project you're talking
about. Yeah, I know you know. Yeah,
and I don't think you hung a lightweight facade on that building. I'll just throw that out there. I'm pretty sure you did.
Surprisingly enough, it's a lot more lightweight than you think.
Well, yeah,
but
it's lighter than concrete, right? Okay,
it is lighter than concrete. It's actually a lot lighter than a lot of things, really. However, the thing about it is that it, like anything that you do to modify it, like you go through all of these like very specific criteria for, and I'm going to bore some people, but like buildings have a natural resonance to them, right? And in certain building types, like say research lab facilities, we have to reduce that to almost zero, right? You've done these things that like, so you have to go through
the scientific
this whole
equipment
process.
The measuring devices cannot have a vibration introduced into them, or else they just people can't do their job.
You completely ruining their research. It's got to be almost like a static zero kind of thing. And so anything that you do to change that building, like pick panel Y over X, you're changing the dynamics that you've already tested. And so now you're like, okay, but now I've added all of this to it. And what does that now mean? And it's just like, well, now we're going to have to do this to counterbalance what you just did here. Or now we're going to have to do that. Or you can't do this type of research in this particular area of this building because, you have got X, Y, or Z going on there.
And people who come in at the end and say, hey, what if I've got a brilliant idea that's going to save you $500,000, and they can't think through all those things because they don't even know about those things.
Exactly.
But they've got this brilliant idea that everybody has to listen to right now so that they can be a hero. Or they're legitimately trying to do the right thing.
Yeah, I mean, most of the time it's not out of malice. It's like, they're hearing the contractor, the owner say, I've only got X amount to build this. And, with oh, inflation or tariffs or whatever are going to like escalate the cost of things. And if we don't purchase this now, it's going to be more expensive. And so you mean, oh, my building's going to go up in cost? I thought you said it was going to cost X amount, and now you're saying it's X plus whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so then they're like, well, we definitely need to save that money. And so then they make a knee-jerk reaction to it, and then realize that they're not saving money, but they're actually adding more money to it based off of kind of the carrot that was dangled in front of them that said, hey, you could potentially save this amount of money if you switch from this panel to this panel. And you're like, and then that's when, the architect raises their hands and says, yes, but, it's like, yes, the panel itself costs that much, but
Mm-hmm.
here's what the trade-off is. And by the way, not only that, but you have to do this and this and this and this. Where's your savings now?
I've been through that process so many times, and
I know, right?
most of the time, we still have to do all the work just to do this.
Oh yeah.
Most of the time,
Absolutely.
even when you say, and you have to think about this, and you have to think about this, and there's this, and people will be like, yep, I need it by tomorrow.
Exactly. It's just like, well, okay, Evan, can you get that to us?
Right.
Yeah.
You'll be working tonight and this weekend, yes?
Well, the hypothetical that I, was giving you earlier today, I need to get out by close of business.
You got some work to do. You better get to
is,
work.
11:59 and 59 seconds in my world.
All right. Well, let's get off this call. I hope people got something out of this and at least could commiserate with you. I know I could. So
yeah,
thanks for sharing.
We've been there, right?
We have been there, and you will continue to be there, it sounds like.
Yes, I will be.
Oh, sorry, man. All right. I'll talk to you soon.